Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Wednesday, January 7th, 2026, and today I am super excited to share this conversation with my buddy Eric Nordell of Beech Grove Farm in Pennsylvania. Eric joined me to chat about, well, quite a lot of things. He and his wife Ann have run Beech Grove Farm since 1983. I was a 1-year-old and not yet running my own farm, and they do things a little differently, like farming with horses, but they dry farm as well, which we discuss. They use some cover crops in the paths in interesting ways, which we also discuss. And in fact, we get into a whole digression about deer fencing that you are going to want to hear. Anyway, huge thanks to Eric for his time. Love chatting with him and hope to visit that farm someday in the next year. We'll see. So let's do it. All right, Eric Nordell, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Jesse. I can't think of a better way to start the new year than having a chat with you. As long as we talk about farming, I'm not really that up to speed on soccer.
Well, I can get you up to speed on soccer, Eric. That's not too hard. But no, I couldn't think of a better way either. I love our conversation. So, in speaking of that, we did an interview not that long ago, which we will link in the show notes for anyone who wants to go back and listen. But maybe just to calibrate everyone as to where you are and, the acreage you're working on and what you grow and those sorts of things. Can you give us kind of a rundown of your farm right now and like what it's looking like?
Yeah, sure. We're located in the mountains of north central Pennsylvania. We're at about 1,600 feet elevation. So it's a relatively cool climate. And the farm is maybe roughly 90 acres. A lot of it's woods, a lot of it's steep or poorly drained grassland. And on the top of the hill we have, it's a 10-acre area surrounded by a sloped deer fence. And within that we have 6 acres in rotation. So roughly any given year we're growing half of that area in vegetables and the other half is fallow in cover crops. We also have a smaller area at the bottom of the farm near our house where we have portable high tunnels. We have irrigation there. Most of them are roughly 12 feet by anywhere from 48 to 132 feet. And they cover what might be the same as 2 large greenhouses, 230 by 96 foot greenhouses. But we grow 2 years and then we move them to a new site. So it's kind of a 2 years on, 2 years off rotation.
You mentioned in there something I'm sure I'm going to get a question about. You mentioned sloped deer fence. Can you describe what that is?
Yeah, this is a design that was developed by Gallagher Springtite for the orchards in New England where deer pressure is very high. And how to describe it without a visual? You have a small post and a rail attached to it. Okay, it's bolted near the top of the post. And that rail, if you can imagine, is making a diagonal slope. So at the top of it, it's maybe 4.5 feet tall, and the bottom is resting on the ground. And there's 7 wires attached to it. Okay, so if you can imagine those wires going from rail to rail, it's creating a slope. And the psychology of it is deer have poor depth perception. So they could easily jump as high as this fence. They could jump as far as this fence. But they aren't likely to try it because they can't judge both of those at the same time. And so the slope, the high part of the slope is away from our vegetables. So the deer are coming in from the outside. As they approach the slope, these wires are above them, like if they were trying to crawl through it. All except the bottom wire is electrified. So if they try to step through it, they're going to get a pretty good shock. and it slows them from going through it quickly. With a vertical fence, deer learn sometimes to just jump through the wires. They're off the ground, so they don't get a shock. So let's see, we put this up, I think it was in 91, and we've had no deer damage since then. We have occasionally seen tracks inside of it. Usually it's fawns that I don't think know what's going on. Maybe occasionally a deer runs through and then wants to get out again. But it's worked very well for us. Yeah.
How do you, I think I saw one that was somewhat similar to that at Peaceful Heritage Farm, but how do you manage the undergrowth, like any sort of grass or whatever that's growing underneath of it?
Yeah. So you would think, oh, now you've got, almost 7 feet on the ground to maintain the grass. And that would be a lot of weed whacking or mowing. Because, the rail pivots on that single bolt that's attached to the post. So we will take a board and prop the rail up. Okay, so now it's up like this. And we can take the sickle bar mower with our horses and just mow right underneath the wires, okay, on the inside of the fence. And think of, hard to do this, if your slope is like that, then on the outside, we kind of come in and out to get the rest of it. So in some ways, it's easier than a vertical fence. Of course, right around the post, you still have to do some handwork.
Yeah, and it's funny because you mentioned in there that you manage that with the horses. You manage almost or entirely. Do you have a tractor? Or you just manage everything with the horses?
We don't have a tractor, so everything as far as the vegetable production is with the horses. We initially also tried to grow all the horse feed. And we just found that to be a time conflict. I mean, there's so much going on in the market garden when it's prime time to make hay, particularly in a wet year. And particularly with just the two of us, it was a labor crunch anyway. So we just decided it's better to buy hay from our neighbors. They have the equipment, and bring in a little bit in the way of nutrients and organic matter onto the farm via the horse feed. So definitely a compromise, but that's what we did. And just on the deer fence, I should say, we have, I guess you call it a blog, called Cover Crops Incorporated. And on that, you can find an article about the slope deer fence and some visuals. So anyone who's really interested in it.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. In fact, one of the things we'll actually talk about today is like you've done some videos and stuff and on that blog, and you do a really good job on those videos. And and we're going to point people to some of them in the next segment. But I know that we talked a couple weeks ago when you mentioned that maybe you were shrinking your production a little bit. Is that kind of the plan for next year?
Yes, it's actually been kind of a long-term plan. When we hit our mid-60s, we thought we should start thinking about scaling down, and so we've been scaling down a little bit every year. And Anne turned 70 in May, and she's been kind of the point person at the farmers market for us, which, as you know, it's fun, but it's also a long, demanding day. And we just decided, well, this would be our last year doing that. And so this coming year, I guess we're already into it now, we're going to shrink how much we grow kind of significantly, I'd say. We don't know exactly how much. And probably shifting away from as many perishable crops and more to storage crops. So it's just a little bit easier to market them or move them. And we're actually hoping to be able to feed people through our local food bank, but all that funding and everything is up in the air. We may just go ahead with it anyway, but so nothing really firm and fast. And in a way, that's such a change after 43 years of kind of always knowing what we wanted to do, if not able to do it, to just having somewhat of a blank slate. And it's both kind of liberating and also stressful, but we're going to enjoy it.
Has it always just been you two? Have you had any other help in general, or do you have any other employees? I can't remember if we talked about that in the last time we chatted.
So it was just the two of us up until, I guess, 25 years ago almost. And it was actually a professor at Penn State started this agroecology summer program. So college students would come in and they'd get kind of an immersion, academic immersion, and they were also placed on farms. And she asked us if we would take a couple of interns, and we said, wow, that would be a big change for us. How about if just a few days a week? And so it's kind of a nice arrangement. They actually worked on a pastured livestock farm 2 days a week and on our vegetable farm 3 days a week. So they got quite a well-rounded experience. But that kind of corrupted us. We found out that having a few hands, particularly for us, the bottleneck is in the pack shed, just getting everything washed and sorted and whatever for market. And so it just so happened that the next year, through a roundabout way, a college student wanted to help on the farm. And so we did that a couple of years. And then, for 17 years, Naomi helped us, again on a part-time basis. She started at 17 and I guess went till 34. And it just kind of suited her lifestyle. And she was a great help. We were, of course, sorry to see her go. And since then, we've had some neighboring teenagers come over. It's generally just 2 or 3 hours, maybe 3 or 4 mornings a week. And again, primarily in the pack shed or in the high tunnels, occasionally planting and harvesting.
Yeah, that's great. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will discuss rye and other cover in the pathways, BRB. Today's episode is brought to you by Ohio Earth Food. So you got your soil tested or need your soil tested, it's time to contact Ohio Earth Food. Since 1972, they have been growers' trusted source for organic soil amendments to apply before you plant to prevent those deficiency symptoms that limit production. Their knowledgeable staff have all been a part of certified organic operations and can help you choose the best products for your soil and deliver or ship them right to your farm. With locations in Northwest Ohio and just north of Madison, Wisconsin, Ohio Earth Food wants to be your partner for organic inputs. Don't count on luck this year. Start your seeds in the Seed Catapult potting soil and put their Revita fertilizers in your beds, and rest assured that your plants will have all the nutrients, stimulants, and energy for whatever comes their way. Feed your soil and let your soil feed the plants. Visit them at ohioearthfood.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by Johnny's Selected Seeds. Johnny's Selected Seeds is a proud supporter of Growers Daily. At Johnny's, they do more than sell seeds. They grow them. They trial them to see how they perform on Johnny's research farm in Maine and across the U.S. and Canada. Only the best varieties are added to their catalog and website. When you need proven varieties you can count on and detailed guidance from seedling to harvest, consider Johnny's your trusted growing partner. JohnnySeeds.com. That's JohnnySeeds.com. All right, back to the show. All right, so one of the things we plan to talk about today, unlike the deer fencing, which was kind of a fun little trail, today is how you are or have tried using rye in the summer in your paths, among other crops. And you shot a great video about this that we will link in the show notes as well that I recommend everybody watch. But maybe give us a little bit of an idea of how you are using annual ground covers in the pathways and that sort of thing.
Yeah, of course. And maybe I should kind of put it in the overall context of what we're doing here. I would say the primary goal for our market garden is moisture management. And there's really two sides of that. One is preserving moisture because we don't irrigate our field production. But the other side of it is preventing runoff. Because, of course, that's a great waste of water that otherwise could be growing vegetables or cover crops. But if it runs off fast and furious enough, you can have erosion. And, of course, that's a loss of soil and nutrients. And that is a concern for us, partly because most of our fields have anywhere from a gentle to moderate slope on them. And some of the market garden borders a soil type that has a fragipan, which is a natural hard pan. So the rainfall doesn't infiltrate as well there and is more likely to run off. And then we put all of our vegetable fields into low beds. Okay, I mean, if you looked at the field, you say, oh, we're row cropping because everything's planted in single rows 34 inches apart. But we actually define these 34-inch beds as part of our bed prep. And, the advantages are just like a permanent bed, you know where to plant everything. If we want to alternate rows, say, between brassicas and lettuce, we can just plant every other bed, right? We don't have to put up a string or measure anything out. And it also creates a kind of a nice guidance system for the horses, those depressed pathways, just like a pathway out at pasture, the horses like to follow that. Those pathways also serve as kind of gutters. So if we get a heavy rain, it will move some of the surplus off the field. That's helpful for protecting the vegetables. They don't get drowned out. But again, those gutters, if they're holding too much water, can start eroding. And so we started seeding those pathways to a single row of rye. So I don't know if you can kind of imagine if my hands are the rows, okay, about 34 inches apart, and my head is the pathway, okay? That's not really a place you want your head to be if a 3/4-ton horse walks through, but that's where we're going to plant the cover crop to protect the soil, because that's the low point, and that's where the water will run. And initially back in the 80s, we were influenced by Elliot Coleman's, it was a new book at the time, The New Organic Grower, where he was advocating broadcasting cover crop seed over the vegetables to establish a living mulch. And we did that. We broadcast the seed with a hand crank spinner, and it worked great as far as establishing a ground cover. But we did find, particularly without irrigation, it could be competitive with a cash crop. All those roots growing in close proximity. If the living mulch got too big, it could reduce air circulation. And then, that would require a lot of mowing or some other way to manage it. And again, since we're always trying to reduce weed pressure, trying to weed, say, a living mulch of clover is very tedious and it's not very cost effective. And another specific to the fact that we grow a lot of lettuce, you broadcast, say, clover over rows of lettuce, a lot of that seed ends up in the whirl of leaves, okay? And the chefs that we were providing weren't that thrilled with free sprouts in their lettuce. So we went to this single row interseeding in the pathways, which really eliminated all those issues. I mean, obviously the seed isn't going to get into the heads of lettuce. You're just walking a walk behind cedar up and down that pathway. We typically do this after cultivation, so the soil's been loosened in the center of the pathway. So we know we're going to get good establishment. The roots of the cover crop aren't anywhere near the vegetable crop. Likewise, the top growth, depending on the cover, really isn't going to be an issue for the cash crop either. I don't know, we've used different cover crops in the pathways over the years. We actually initially were using hairy vetch quite a bit. Most people think of hairy vetch growing with, say, rye, and it crawls up the rye like a trellis. But when it's planted by itself, it just lays prostrate on the ground. So it makes this nice green carpet over the soil surface. Of course, if it grows far enough, then it reaches your vegetable crop and can start growing up on top of it. We found that we could attach disc killers to our cultivator. We set them straight, and that trims back the vetch vines, prevents it from growing into the vegetables. But of course, that's an added step. And it doesn't work very well with really bushed out crops like peppers. When you don't have the room actually to get in with the disc killers, or you're going to start trimming the peppers as well. And then it's not quite as hardy with weather extremes. If it gets very wet, it's more prone to disease. If it's very hot and dry, it's more prone to insects. So we have shifted mainly to rye, and people might be surprised by the use of cereal rye as a summer cover crop, because it's a winter annual, right? But the interesting thing about it is it needs to get cold weather to get the cue to send up a seed stalk to make grain. And that, of course, tall rye would be a real nuisance between rows of vegetables, unless you needed a windbreak or something. But the nice thing is if you plant it in the spring or summer, and even the fall, of course, it stays low. And even the roots really don't grow out that far. So you can have a kind of dependable, contained living mulch just in the pathway.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I was thinking about that with the vetch. We tend to think of these crops as overwintered crops, but they definitely do something different when planted in the summer. And I haven't planted rye in the summer, but rye in our climate tends to, let's say we mow it really low to the ground. It just doesn't come back very competitive because it's summertime. It's not its climate, right. Even if the roots are really well established over the winter. And so when I saw those pictures and I saw like in the video clips, like how small that rye is, I was like, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I think one question that we'd probably get is competitiveness. You already mentioned kind of moisture competitiveness, but are you seeing any sort of antagonism either through moisture or otherwise, other means from the rye having that in the path next to your plants?
I can't say that we have, but we don't usually have a control. We just eat everything because we want to protect the soil. So, I can't give you a scientific answer to that, but we're not concerned about it. It doesn't seem to. I would say there are other issues. Sometimes we have done this with clover, and sometimes we combine the rye and clover, which is kind of nice. But now you start getting, what would you say, quarters for wildlife, okay? Rabbits and rodents kind of like that kind of cover, okay? Where the rye by itself doesn't seem to attract them or provide the right kind of cover for most of those animals. What's interesting, I should say, about the rye also is and this might happen sooner in your climate, which I'm pretty sure is hotter and warmer or more humid than us, is it can actually die out at a certain point if it's planted early enough in the summer. And this seems to vary with the variety as well. We actually grew two different types of rye in our interseeded pathways this year. And the one is Elbon rye, which is normally a very big, vigorous rye used for people that are doing roller crimped no-till. And then we also used a forage rye called Graze Master. And it was interesting, the Graze Master rye established really fast. So we got really good ground cover. And then as it got hotter and drier, it started dying out. And you could say, well, that's a liability. It is certainly if you needed the protection through the winter as well. But we actually think it worked out kind of well because it was so hot and dry here. It maintained enough live and dead cover for erosion control if and when we needed it. But there was not much there alive to compete with the cash crop or even be pulling up moisture. So whereas the Elbon rye established more slowly, but it never died out. And so we didn't actually see a problem with that. And of course, that would be better if you wanted the protection through the winter, which in some cases we did. But it was a rather dramatic difference just between two varieties of cereal rye.
Yeah, I bet. I like that, the Graze Master, the idea of having like a summer kill cover crop, right? That's like in contrast to like a winter kill cover crop that, you know, you can grow, get some ground cover. It dies when it gets super hot and kind of mulches your soil for you. Yeah, I love that. I think that is really interesting. It's something I really am tinkering with in my brain to try and figure out how to trial some of that here. Maybe this summer, we'll see. Anyway, we're going to take one more quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about some more tips, in fact, for farming without irrigation. Be right back. Today's episode is brought to you by FarmRaise. Still struggling with your balance sheet? Your lender's asking for a balance sheet and you're stuck with a spreadsheet mess or guessing your numbers? FarmRaise Tracks takes the stress out of farm finance. With one click, you can generate an accurate, up-to-date balance sheet that shows your assets, liabilities, and equity. No accounting degree required. You'll be ready for loan applications, tax season, or just a clearer picture of where your farm stands. Join thousands of farmers using Tracks to build stronger businesses. Get 20% off with code NOTIL20 at farmraise.com for the lifetime of your membership. Today's episode is also brought to you by High Mowing Organic Seeds. High Mowing Organic Seeds is celebrating their 30th anniversary with 47 fabulous new varieties for 2026. Highlights include downy mildew-resistant cucumbers, a poppy that looks like cotton candy, and 12 new tomato varieties. High Mowing offers more than 750 varieties of certified organic, non-GMO vegetables, flowers, herbs, and cover crops, all trialed for optimal performance in organic growing systems. High Mowing has the professional quality seeds and supportive grower reps to get you from seed to harvest. Visit highmowingseeds.com to request a catalog and use code 26NOTIL, all one word, 26NOTILL, for 10% off your order of $100 or more. That's highmowingseeds.com. All right, back to the show. All right, so one of the topics that has been coming up a lot lately is dry farming and how to really maximize a dry farming situation. So I'm wondering, to you, beyond like we just talked about with the living pathways, what are some approaches that you've found to be effective at managing your moisture levels?
Yeah, so how would I say, there's a number of steps we use for preserving moisture. And the first step really begins with the fallow year. So we precede every vegetable crop with a year of cover crops and bare fallow periods. And this helps both because the bare fallow periods are a way to dramatically reduce the number of weed seeds in the soil. Okay, we're just doing, you might think of it as a series of stale seed beds. But we aren't preceding a vegetable crop, we're just doing it between two cover crops, right? At the same time, the cover crops are conditioning the soil. So we're trying to improve or at least maintain soil structure. And that's important so we have good moisture movement up and down in the soil. And it's also important so that our vegetables can easily grow a big root system. Okay, there's nothing impeding their roots, they can get down where the moisture is. So the one disadvantage with the cover crops, particularly an overwintering cover crop, is they use a lot of moisture. So one of our rules of thumb is that we want to kill the cover crop well ahead of planting. So for spring crops, we typically will just use a winter-killed cover crop. So we just eliminate that issue. We're conserving moisture all winter, in a sense, under the dead cover crop. For summer and fall vegetables, we'll precede them with an overwintering cover crop, but we try to kill it typically at least 6 weeks before planting, so that we pretty much know we're going to get at least one significant rain before planting. And when we kill the cover crop, I mean, in some cases it could just be mowing it. It doesn't have to be drastic, but we seem to need at least a little bit of tillage so that we're able to transplant and direct seed. And we try to minimize the depth of tillage. So we're maintaining that soil structure created by the cover crop roots. But then we'll have maybe 2, at the most 3 inches of loose soil on the surface where the cover crop top growth has been incorporated. So we end up with kind of a cover crop earth mulch. And that's good both for absorbing rainfall and also reducing evaporation. So as capillary action brings soil up to the surface, then you have this break with the looser soil and residues to prevent as much of it from evaporating. When we go to plant, and I've already talked about this, we're planting in widely spaced single rows. Okay, so this is to ensure a large reservoir of soil moisture for each plant. Okay, obviously the more plants you have, the more demand there is on a given volume of soil. So we have the room, so we just give our crops plenty of space. And then it depends on the crop. Either we maintain a earth mulch with cultivating and then interseed, as we already discussed, or we apply a straw mulch that is generated from the adjacent cover crops. Okay, so if you can imagine, we have alternating strips between vegetables and cover crops. So let's say we have a rye cover crop next to a field of onions. We mow the rye when it's dropping pollen, let it dry, rake it into windrows, and then walk the windrows into the pathways between the rows of vegetables. Okay, so it's convenient, everything's in close proximity. We're using a horse-drawn side delivery hay rake, and we can just keep raking the windrows over. You can imagine the first going along the outside of the field, we're raking right next to the edge of the vegetable field. The next windrow, we might go over it twice and bring it over to the edge of the field, okay, instead of having to carry them a long way with a hay fork or by hand. So it's relatively easy to do. We're mowing with a sickle bar mower, so we have long stems of cover crop. They're not going to blow away like finely chopped straw, or sometimes even baled straw does it. Because we're growing it ourselves, we can time it so that there's no viable grain in the cover crop straw. That's sometimes a problem. Say we used to buy in wheat straw, and you'd put out this nice mulch, and 6 weeks later it would be a living mulch of wheat from all the seed germinating, depending on the time of year. And likewise, not importing weed seeds because we're growing it right there. So this means we don't need a baler We're not trying to bale this, store it, bring it back out, and apply the mulch. We're just doing it right there in the field. Of course, the limitation is we can only grow so much cover crop straw. Even if we used all the cover crops we grew, it would only be 3 acres. And that's not enough to mulch 3 acres. But we're not doing that. A lot of our crops are interseeded with a living mulch.
And you mentioned, one of the things is just killing the cover crop with mowing it. So those rye cover crops that you're mowing at the flowering stage, at that sort of yellow flower stage, are those being terminated with that sickle bar, or is that those are plots that you're ultimately just going to do some light tillage on, and then that's how they're going to be finished, kind of like what you were describing in the beginning of that?
So it really depends. Sometimes it would be a straight stand of rye, in which case we mow it and remove the biomass, and then it makes it very easy to do shallow tillage. Okay, we just have a short stubble, and the root system, particularly if you can wait a couple of weeks, the root system dies. So it's not like this tough sod you're trying to deal with. But sometimes we will seed a cover crop mix. So we might have rye and vetch, a couple of types of clovers, maybe some ryegrass, timothy. This year we added some chicory. So in this instance, we are actually using the rye, in a sense, as a nurse crop for a longer-term sod. And this would be in fields that we weren't necessarily planning to use a bare fallow. And I should say that removing the biomass might seem a little counterintuitive because you're trying to build up the soil there. But it does really facilitate tillage. Okay, now, alternatively, you could invest in a flail mower and chop it up into fine pieces. Using the horses, we would have to then mount an engine on the flail chopper or get a PTO engine forecart for the horses. You're starting to get into a lot of money for a small operation. So, we're using a sickle bar mower that's probably 120 years old, an old beater of a hay rake. These are kind of low value or low cost implements to do the job.
Yeah. And you mentioned a surprising one in there, chicory. Where did that where did that one come in?
You mean why, or just what it is, or?
Yeah, I mean either. I that was a surprising one for me. Is that like what was the?
So chicory is, or at least I've heard about it in the context of grazers. It's a nice supplement in a pasture that brings up a lot of trace minerals from down deep. It has a big, thick taproot. Okay, it almost would remind you of a dandelion root, except it's a single root that goes straight down. And I don't know if this is true or not, but these forbs, like chicory, are supposed to put out a lot of root exudates. So instead of a lot of fine root hairs like you would have on rye, here you're getting a big fleshy taproot with a lot of root exudates going out into the soil. But on a most fundamental level, it's just some diversity to it. And this is last year was our first year using it, so I can't tell you yet if it's a benefit, other than during the very dry weather, it grew the best of the mix at the end of the summer. It was better than even the sweet clover, which is pretty drought hardy.
Yeah, not surprising there. Chicory's great like that. That's great. It's a really cool crop. We have obviously native versions of many different types of chicory around here, but it's cool to hear that in the mix. I think that's interesting. I mean, Eric, this has been awesome. I really appreciate your time every time I get to chat with you. It's just such an honor, and really love your work. And is there anything that you'd like to point listeners to that they can sort of follow your work or maybe read about it?
Yeah, well, I mentioned the blog, Cover Crops Incorporated. We have written for years for the Small Farmers Journal. Anyone that's, wants to dig through some back issues. And more recently, we've been trying our hand at these short videos. It's definitely something very new to us, but kind of fun. And, we've also written for Acres USA. Most of the articles on the blog are from Rural Heritage Magazine and The Natural Farmer, which is the publication of the Northeast NOFA Association. I don't know where else, but I'm sure people have enough of me just from what they've heard today. So.
I doubt that. I bet you're going to get a lot of questions. So, Eric, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you coming and hanging out with me.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jesse. It's been a pleasure.
All right. How awesome is Eric? I really recommend watching his videos, and also go back and listen to the podcast I did with Eric a couple years ago. Really love the work that they're doing, and we will link it in the show notes for how to find him and Beech Grove Farm and all those things. Otherwise, that's it for this Wednesday. Don't forget, No Till Growers is now officially a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. You can learn more about how to do that in the show notes. Please make sure to like and subscribe and/or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out as well. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors, and if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and my wife Hannah for absolutely everything in the world. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a hat or a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, at notillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of January, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Lala's Family Farm, Elizabeth Louie, and John. These are our earthworms from December. So shouts to them. They get 2 shouts on the show. And so, all right, so you will remember that from Monday that we were following Jamie, our referee, who was reffing a U12 soccer game, and it was going fine. But the whole day had this like sort of weird vibe to it. First, one of the coaches didn't show up, and the other ref she was working with that day was pretty concerned about it, though Jamie didn't really care because he was a bit of a yeller. Anyway, then there was just like this one family from the opposing team that just seemed odd. It was something about the way they were all like a mom, a dad, a brother, just kind of standing there in a line, shoulder to shoulder, right at the midfield line on the parent side, just staring at their son who was playing in the game. Or Jamie assumed it was their son because they didn't seem to look at anyone else on the field and or seem particularly interested in anything else. Though, of course, she couldn't watch them the whole time because she was reffing, and she's good at reffing. Anyway, at halftime, while the refs were kind of taking their break and talking about the game, she noticed that they were still standing quietly right there at the midfield line while everyone else was kind of like conversing, sitting down and going to the concession stand and all those things. What happens next? Well, that is for tomorrow, provided we get some signups or bump ups on Pitch of Dreams, like Field of Dreams, but like for soccer, nothing to do with anything Field of Dreamsy. Anyway, thanks for watching and/or listening. We'll see you then. Bye.